Hi, welcome to Beau Hannam Guitars. In this video I'm going to be showing you how I convert a fretted classical guitar into a fretless classical guitar. So since I was a teenager I listened to Indian music and particularly sarod music, which is a fretless instrument and it's a metal fingerboard, and it had a certain sound, especially with those sliding notes. Recently, in the last 5 years, I've been listening to Cenk Erdogan. I did not pronounce that correctly. I don't know how to find out how to pronounce it correctly.
Hey Beau, how are you? It's pronounced Cenk Erdogan. Cenk Erdogan. Cenk Erdogan.
Cenk Erdogan. He's a Turkish player and his fretless performances are absolutely astonishingly good. The second fretless guitar player you need to know about is Beau Gravelle.
Hello Beau, it's Beau Gravelle.
Beau Gravelle, and I met him through Instagram as well. His playing is a little less Arabic-y, Turkey-ish and more, well, I won't tell you, just listen to it. So while Cenk and Beau both play fretless guitar, their sound is a lot different, I find, and I really enjoy both of them, so please give them a listen. And spoilers, at the end of this video, Beau was kind enough to record a quick 30-second video of him improvising some fretless guitar, so you'll get to hear a real professional play fretless guitar the way it's meant to sound. And then after that, you've got about like 8 minutes of me fumbling around and making a fool of myself. And also at the end of this video I'll include a lot more detail about where you can buy fretless guitars and get lessons from both Cenk and Beau. So I was approached by a local guy who was wanting a fretless instrument and he was going to buy like a $1,500 guitar and get me to turn it into a fretless, but I gave him the following advice, which I give to everyone. Buy something cheap before you buy something expensive to turn it into a fretless instrument, because it's really difficult to play fretless guitar and you might just not like the learning curve because it is a long one. So he bought this Yamaha C40, it's under $200. There was one thing which I forgot to tell him. This one doesn't have a truss rod. And if you are going to buy a cheap classical guitar, get one with a two-way adjustable truss rod. Most cheap classical guitars have a truss rod in them. This one don't, but that's okay. So the benefits of having a truss rod are obviously to kick the guitar or the neck back with string tension. That can come in handy even more so with fretless instruments. Why a truss rod is handy in this regard is the frets act as a stiffening agent for the neck, and when you take those out, I'm going to have to replace them with something that fills in the fret slots fully. And by that I mean, I can't just put in like soft veneer or something. If I fail to fill in the fret slots with something hard, all those fret slots will act as a kerf and this neck will just fold up like that. So I do have to stiffen up the neck somehow, and I have a few tricks to show you. So it's actually turned out good that this one doesn't have a truss rod. So the first thing I have to do is pull out all the frets and replace them with something. And I'm going to use 20 thou black fiber this is from LMI. I've just cut these into strips, and this stuff is quite strong. It doesn't compress very easily. It compresses less than just like black veneer, which is what I have used in the past, but with guitars with truss rods. There's a few different ways to deal with the position markers, and I'll talk about that when we get to that. Okay, so I'm just going to get into it and I'll talk through the elements as I do them. First thing to do obviously is to remove the frets. And I've got one of these chip stoppers from StewMac, and these help minimize the fingerboard pulling out at the top of the fret slots. They're really handy. And this is my favorite fret puller outerer by 3 Peaks. StewMac sell them as well. I always start at the end of the fingerboard when I'm just pulling out a few frets, because some fretboards will require heat to pull out the frets more cleanly. Some don't. I always just check before I bother getting out the soldering iron, because not every fretboard needs it. This is actually an Indian rosewood fingerboard, but it's dyed black. So I've just pulled up the fret here and I'm just sliding in this underneath the fret, and this will just help minimize chip outs. And you just work the fret pullers along and chuck the frets away. So that's absolutely perfect. I don't need to use heat, which is going to save time. I can just continue pulling these out and then on to the next step. Okay, so all the frets are out. That took about 5 minutes. I actually did this process before I pulled the frets out, but I'm going to do it again. I'm just going to judge how stiff this neck is. And this neck is actually quite stiff, even without the frets, which is great. Stiff neck is always optimal. If this was a really floppy neck, if the wood was too thin here and it just wasn't strong wood, and the kerf of the fret slots were cut really deep and the fretboard itself wasn't giving very much stability to the neck, I could have been in some trouble because I may not have been able to regain the rigidity in the neck that the frets offered from being driven in. What I'm going to do is just clean out the fret slots using this fret slot cleaner from StewMac. So how I did the fret slots, I've left one. Just going to use the saw and just lightly score that end, and then use the other saw, which is appropriately thicknessed for fret slots. And then I'll come in with the hook and just clean out the entire fret slot, not touching this treble side. Done. So I'm actually not going to bother sanding this before I glue in the fillers, because I'll just have to clean out the fret slots with compressed air. The fellow who owns this is right-handed, so he'll be looking at the instrument down like this. So I've kept the finish on the treble side. If you blow through there, it doesn't matter, but I kept that because I don't have to fix it up now. But I did saw through the bass side finish. And the reason for that is I'm going to use all of the existing fret slot, fill it in with the 20 thou black fiber, but for the last 1/8 of an inch, which is about 3 mil, I'm going to put a white veneer here. So when the player is looking down at the instrument, they'll be able to know where the frets were so they can intonate well. If you don't have any position markers, it's really hard, and it's really, really hard anyway. So you need, I would absolutely suggest to put some white position markers on the actual frets. And this is different from the position markers, which are usually dots. This is filling in the actual fret slots ends with some white veneer. It's a really good solution for kind of having hidden frets, but also frets that are visible. I did do another version of this on an electric guitar, and the customer is an older fella. He wanted mahogany in there, so it was a little brighter. You can also do full white, and they basically look like frets. So just depending on your eyesight, how good you are, just play it by ear. So I have to mark an 1/8 of an inch in, and then just join up those marks. So now I've got the line that is an 1/8 of an inch in from the bass side. So normally a fret slot is between 20 and 23 thou, and I thought there was going to be quite a bit of slack in here, but this is actually quite hard to get in. I was going to use epoxy to glue these in, but I think I can get away with, well, I know I can get away with CA glue. Thin CA glue also has the benefit of seeping into the end grains of every slot. So it's actually a better solution to use thin CA glue anyway, so win-win. So draw the line with white pencil, much easier to see. Start from the widest part of the fretboard. I always do that even when I'm fretting, because if I screw up something, and it's too short, I can always use it for the next fret, which is a little bit shorter. So I'm just going to fit this into the fret slot and push it up against the edge, the treble edge of the fingerboard, which has got the finish on it. Just be careful. Then mark where the line is, just here, and then trim off the excess, refit. And it's a little long still, so just take that back a bit more. That's perfect. You want to push these as far as you can down, as far as they'll go. And if you've got, a flat mallet, work that down. Then just a little bit of the white push that in the end to create the 1/8 visual aid, and just have to do that 20 more times, or however many frets you've got. So I hope you're getting value out of this video. If you are, please consider liking, subscribing, and leave a comment to let me know what you think of it, and enjoy the rest of the video. So I've got to a point which I thought would be a good place to pause and just tell you about something else. I've done above the body. There is a way to correct a neck that is not a stiff neck, and if it doesn't have a truss rod. It's what we do on old Martin guitars or any other guitars that don't have a truss rod and they have a large relief, and that is compression fretting. And it's basically you drive a fret with a larger tang than the fret slot into the fret slot, and that creates a wedging effect. So the neck that was like this, gradually with many wedges, becomes flat, or depending on what your target is, more than like backbowed, and then when you put string tension on, it'll come up to the perfect relief of like 5 thou or something. Why I mentioned all that is you can do the same thing with this, but you don't have frets obviously. So one way to do this would be to clamp down the body and then to put a weight on the headstock, or come up with a contraption where you can use a clamp to slowly bring this down. And what that does is, will say the fret slot is here, when you clamp down the headstock, it will open up, or gape open very slightly the fret slots. Different, or the opposite to with string tension, the fret slots close up. So if you have a neck that's floppy or not strong or not stiff, clamp the body down and pull this down so it opens this up, and then you've got more opportunity to drive in thicker elements. So maybe I could do a 20 thou plus a 10 thou. Another way would be to use actual wedges of ebony or other wood. Another way would be to mix up epoxy with thickener in it. So when you put the thickened epoxy in the fret slot and then you fill it up with the material, whatever it is that you're using, and you will let it dry with the headstock still under tension, so it'll still be backbowed, so to speak. When you release it the next day or in 2 days, you will have created what will effectively be compression fretting, just a little bit different. Compression fretting is quite an advanced repair technique or fretting technique. It's not for the faint-hearted. Hit each side a couple of times because it'll soak in, and you want to be really careful, especially on a nitro finish, which this isn't, but don't let or try to minimize the CA glue running down the side and onto the finish, because CA glue ruins finish, a nitro. That's all glued up now. I'm going to leave that overnight to fully harden up. With the little 1/8 white parts, I just put a dot of glue on each side just to pre-solidify them, and hopefully to minimize glue seeping out the one side of the fingerboard that's, where it can spill out, because this is shored up with finish. But it looks like the finish is, the CA glue is pooling up, which is good, because that means that it's not seeping down and leaking into the end grain of the fingerboard, which is good if it does that, but it's also good when it stops doing that, because I can go have dinner. So I'll come back tomorrow and clean all this up. You're about halfway through this video, so if you're enjoying this, don't forget to like and subscribe so you can see how this turned out. But spoilers, it turned out great. It's the next day and I've trimmed all the excess fillers down to the fingerboard. I've lightly sanded the fingerboard to about 220, and I've just cleaned up the side with some CA glue and shellac. So it's just a simple procedure of taking the excess down to get to the fingerboard. You can damage the fingerboard if you're not careful, so be careful with the chisel. But I've used a whole bunch of files and then just to get the excess off, and then came back in with sandpaper and took it up, to a reasonably high grit. What do you think I'm going to do now? Well, what I'm going to do now is string it up, because I want to see, this isn't done yet, but I'm going to string it up to see what the neck does. And I mentioned before about there's some important aspects to come. The most important aspect is to get the geometry of the fingerboard correct so it doesn't buzz. So I'm going to have to set the action roughly and set the nut lower than when it was, because I'm going to have to come down like at least a fret level or a fret height, so probably 40 thou or something. And then I'll see exactly how much relief the strings give this, and then I can figure out what to do from there. It's probably going to need a little more relief than is typical on a classical guitar, but we'll see. And the action I'm going to go for is about the same as a classical guitar, about 3 mil at the 12th fret for both the treble and bass. So the best case scenario is I string it up, lower the action to where it needs to be in the nut, and it doesn't buzz, and the neck geometry is perfect. So if that happens, that will be good. And I hope that's what will happen. I think looking at it like this, it looks pretty good, but I think I'm going to have to take a little bit off here, but we'll see. All strung up. So it works. The fingerboard is good, the geometry is nice. It has a nice curve coming down here, which is what you would want on a typical guitar. I'm not sure what the relief is, but it's probably about 4 thou, I'm thinking. Let's find out. So at the 6th fret, yeah, it's probably about 3 thou. So pretty low. I'll just wait for the f***ing plane to f***ing go overhead, won't I? Fucking hell. So the relief is about 3 thou at the 6th fret. The treble is about 3 mil. The bass is, yeah, about 3 mil. So I had to take 2 mils off the bass side of the saddle and 1 mil off the treble side. And that was basically to take into account the height of the fret. I didn't remove any wood. I took the nut down, and there's about a millimeter gap where the first fret was to the bottom of the string. There is one issue, and that is the saddle is rather low, and the break angle of the string behind the saddle is not very optimum. You want like a 45-degree angle, something like that. If it goes over the saddle and it's just a very slight kink, it doesn't drive the top very well. Having said all that, there are ways to regain, if you need to regain the break angle behind here, and this goes with any guitar. One is you can cut the neck off and then reset the neck so the neck is kicked back more. The other way is to plane the nut end of the fingerboard so you're removing the wood of the fingerboard, so the fingerboard, instead of it being kind of like that, you're removing that much off the nut end, and that will lower the action of the strings. Therefore you can raise the height of the saddle. The trouble with that is when you remove material or wood from the fingerboard here, say 1 or 2 mil, you're also removing strength. And strength is something which I don't think I want to sacrifice in this neck because it doesn't have a truss rod. Normally, I would probably take off a little bit of material off the nut if this had a truss rod, but I don't. If I remove this and it becomes weaker up here, this will bend up more, then I'll have more height more action than I want. So it's kind of a comedy of errors, basically. But that could be fixed with a truss rod. It's not buzzing out anywhere. I might put scrape a little more relief onto the bass side, because there is a bit of something here. Especially if I strike it hard. I mean, you know, that's obvious. That happens. If you strike any instrument hard enough, it's going to buzz. But it only happens on the upstroke. There's a tiny bit which you won't be able to hear if I downstroke. But if I upstroke even lighter than that, it's very apparent. That could be a nut issue. Quick update. I refiled the nut slot on the bass, and it was the nut slot. So, buzz gone. Probably time for new strings too. I'm going to opt for high tension strings on this because I want the greatest amount of power to be had acoustically, because this doesn't have a pickup. If you can get a pickup in one of these, it is optimal, because you do lose a lot of volume when you take the frets out. So I have 3 things to do. So I'm still going to add a little bit of relief to the fingerboard and then dye it, and one secret thing that you'll have to wait for. So I've relaxed the strings, and the neck without the strings on is absolutely dead flat. It's a pretty stiff neck, which is good. And the thin CA glue and the 20 thou fiber really helped keep it stiff, so that's good. So I'm just going to scrape some relief into the neck. So it is scraped and sanded, and I've added, without strings, 3 thou from the 11th fret to the 3rd fret, so exactly where I want it. And it fades out quite nicely, and I'm not that worried about this area here. It's just a nice long curve, very, very subtle, and the Indian rosewood is quite pronounced now. So next thing I'm going to do, well, I sanded this to 1200. I'm just going to string it up with these strings one last time just to make sure everything's good. Then I'm going to dye the fretboard, and then the secret thing. Okay, all strung up for the second time, and the relief is about 10 thou in the middle here, which is just a touch more than I put on a typical classical guitar, but this isn't a typical classical. It seems you need a little bit more relief on fretless instruments, but you know, about 10 thou seems to work, as long as the 10 thou is in the right place and tapering down to nothing. Now I can finally get rid of these old strings and dye the fingerboard. So I'm using a black leather dye that LMI used to sell, but you can still buy it. The fingerboard has been blackened with the black leather dye. Looks good. The side of the fingerboard isn't black, it's still rosewood color, but I'm not doing any more on such a cheap instrument. If it was a good instrument, I'd just re-fingerboard it. The final prep does a few things. It's going to stiffen up the fingerboard slightly. It's going to fill in some pores, and it's going to make the fingerboard surface smoother. So there's 2 products you could use. Well, I guess there's 3. One is thin CA glue, or you could use thick CA glue and then sand it down, but I don't want to sand it after this because I've dyed it, although I could re-dye it. The other way would be to use West Systems epoxy, which is quite thin, and you could just rub that in and it would do a good job. I'm going to use an epoxy, but it's a different type. It's Smith's penetrating epoxy, and Rick Turner put me onto this stuff. He used it quite a lot, it seemed. It's 2 parts, equal parts by volume. Won't need that much. I'll probably mix 10 grams or something. And you're supposed to brush it on, but I'm going to use a lint-free cloth. So here we go. This stuff's really watery. It's about as thin as thin CA glue. takes the dye off, but that's okay. Okay, so I put it on quite thick, even though it is actually very thin. It's kind of like putting on French polish thick. It's sort of thick. And the colour has come out a little bit, but I just can't help that. What I'll do when this dries tomorrow, I'll sand it back with 1500 grit sandpaper and see how it looks. I might buff it, I'm not sure. It's going to be very, very smooth once I finish with it. Another way to go about this is to sand the fingerboard with, say, 800 grit sandpaper and then flood it with thin CA glue so it fills up the pores. It's a pore filler kind of thing, and that also stiffens it up. But either way, you're sort of messing with the color. It's hard to keep the color and not mess with it. But another way to add color is to use ammonia. I've never actually tried it before, but apparently if you brush straight ammonia onto a wood like this and leave it overnight, it darkens it up. So I'll leave this overnight and come back tomorrow and string it up for the final time. So it's the next day and the fingerboard is looking really nice, really smooth. There's still grain, but it's not enough to worry about. So I'm just gonna use some 1500 grit sandpaper and make this even shinier. Actually, it'll be less shiny. I'm just taking away the ridges left from when I wiped on the epoxy. Just want to concentrate on the treble edge because there's a bit of a lip here, kind of a build up. I could use a razor blade, give that a try. Okay, that's going to be it for this guitar. I'll give you a close-up so you can see the quality of the finish. It's not like a buffed surface. It's there's a little bit of shine. It looks worse on camera than it is. Those little divots, they probably measure 1 or 2 thou deep or something. I mean, it's just ridiculously nothing. You could go crazy and just get that absolutely perfect. You could even spray it with polyurethane and get it absolutely dead flat, kind of like, you know, the gloss back finish or something. Not particularly needed to have it perfect like that. This is like 10 times better than a typical rosewood fingerboard. It's super flat, super nice. So I'll put this fingerboard on the buffing wheel and then string it up. One last thing I did, I was looking at the saddle height and I just wasn't happy with the break angle behind the treble strings, so I put a Brazilian rosewood shim under it and it lifted it up about 20 thousandths. So it's about a 1 millimeter thick shim tapering down to nothing on the bass side. So the action's still like in the 3.5 mil range. Okay, all strung up and tuned. Definitely need a tuner because you can't do the, you know, 5th fret thing. I've strung it up with high tension classical guitar strings by Savare's Alliance Cantija Premium. And I have 2 picks here. I want to show you why I'm going to use one over the other. So I did mention before, when you take the frets out, it sounds a lot warmer and you lose volume. So this is a Folkways pick from Folkways Music in Canada. Mark Stutman, if you don't know his YouTube video, check it out. But I really like this pick on steel string guitars that have frets. But I don't like it on this guitar because it's too good. The reason what makes it good for other guitars makes it bad on this one, it adds a roundness to the sound. So I'm actually going to be using a White Fang pick by James Hetfield of Metallica. This adds a lot more treble. So Folkways pick first. James Hetfield. Hope you can hear the difference. Folkways. Hetfield. The details of the sound might not come through. This is a Rode mic, which isn't meant for acoustic guitar sound. So in regard to getting lessons for the fretless guitar, both Cenk and Buzz have tutorials online. Cenk has his normal YouTube page, but he also has a fretless guitar lessons YouTube page, and that has a list of about 57 YouTube videos. Some of them are in Turkish, but you can still listen to the music, but a lot of them are in English, probably half of them, and that's a great way to find out how to play better. Buzz also has countless videos on Instagram, but many videos on YouTube and on his website. They're quick 10-minute introductory tutorials, but they give you the fundamentals of how to hit notes and various other tips and tricks. Just check all of these things out that I'm saying. Links in the description, of course. Another cool thing on Buzz Gravelle's website is his frequently asked questions page. There's a lot of information there, and it's all really, really good. It's information from a professional fretless guitar player, so read through all that if you're interested in fretless guitar. As for purchasing a fretless guitar, you've seen what I've done. I took a $170 guitar and turned it into a fretless guitar. Your repair guy, girl will charge you what they charge you. Buzz is part owner in an importer of fretless guitars. It's G&G guitars, and the guitar brand is called Altamira, and they range from about $575 up to the top range one, which is the N600 Plus, which is what Buzz personally plays, and that goes for $1,900. So their basic one for $575, it's actually not that bad. After you spend money on a cheap fretted guitar and pay somebody like me to unfret it, it could be around $575. So it's definitely worthwhile checking out the G&G guitars. All these links will be in the description, so just check them out. So both Cenk and Buzz post regularly to Instagram. Buzz is really good with uploading videos of him playing, and so is Cenk. It's a really good resource to have there, just to listen. So make sure you check out their Instagram accounts and their YouTube. They also have albums on Spotify, so go listen to them or buy a CD from one of their gigs. So unfortunately, neither Buzz or Cenk do any personalized Zoom classes with the public. Cenk is too busy, as is Buzz, because Buzz teaches at university. He's a professor of music, and if you are really keen on fretless guitar, then he would be the guy to study under, I'm thinking, in America, so keep that in mind. So special thanks to Cenk, and to Buzz. Thank you so much for making those quick little videos for me. That was very kind. So I'm going to play for, as little as possible, but I'm actually going to include a bit of music by Buzz, and he was kind enough to just improvise some stuff to be included in this video, because I really wanted you to hear what a fretless instrument played by a really good player can sound like.
Hello, Beau. It's Buzz Gravelle. Hope everything's going well with you.
So here we go. Thanks again, Cenk and Buzz. Obviously, you want to incorporate a lot more slides to really take advantage of this. And when you've got effects and compression and that really sounds good. Micro tones, that's between notes. The normal notes would be, but I'm playing another real advantage of this, but you know, hard to do, hard to hit the right note. You can also just roll the finger like, and it's basically like bending. Really fine tuned, really beautiful microtones, but beyond my reach. Chords are out of the question for me. Like, this is a C chord, as best as I can do it. It's vaguely there. Yeah, it's just... So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this conversion. If you have the opportunity to play Fretless, please do so. Absolutely listen to Cenk and Buzz. I love listening to both those guys play. It's really, we're fortunate to have both of those guys. So thank you so much for watching. See you next time. Bye. I mentioned at the beginning of the video that I listened to a lot of Indian music, more when I was in my 20s, funnily enough, but still do, and Sarod music. And I still listen to Turkish music and Iranian music, Pakistani music like Nusrat Fateh Ali Khan. What I tend to gravitate to is the Middle Eastern sort of Arabic sound. when I play fretless. Well, it's Middle Eastern Arabic-y sounding to me, you know, a cracker from Australia. That's Middle Eastern, right?